They warned that the tunnel takes more than it gives back. Sound, light, and the count of those who step in and do not step out. On the ledge above its mouth, rusted rail ties form a crooked crown, and wind funnels through as if the hillside were breathing. In this first act, first scene, the story arranges itself like evidence on a cold table. Facts chilled by time, rumors still warm to the touch. The ground is scored by skid marks and candle wax. The rock remembers screams better than the open air does. A staggered tally of tragedies blurs into a pattern that authorities called coincidence until the body count began to rhyme. Locals say the tunnel is hungry. Engineers say it is unstable. Someone, years ago, said it was both. This is the hook. A hollow carved for trains that now moves only whispers. A place where electricity dies in your hands and compasses turn to indecision. We enter with cameras, maps, and a promise not to look away, even when the darkness does. In the second scene, the official count reads like an inventory no one wanted to keep. Collisions, cave-ins, disappearances entered as if misfiled parcels of human breath. The records mention rockfall zones and budget shortfalls with the same neat handwriting, as though gravity and money answered to the same supervisor. Locals tell a different ledger, one etched in candles and murmurs, where promises were broken when rails were carved too deep and veins of water were cut wrong, letting the hillside bleed under stone. Every decade, something new was tried. Drainage trenches, reinforced beams, a road closure that never quite held. Yet, the place continued to demand interest on an old debt. The route reopens, the count inches forward, and the tunnel's mouth stains rain with the mineral taste of iron. We trace incident maps and find a lattice of repetition. Certain hours, certain winds, alarms that fail together, rescuers who lose each other at arm's length. We wonder aloud if the dark has its own schedule. The first survivor account arrives reluctant, carried in on a voice that tries to keep its balance. There were 3 that night, a compact car with fogged windows and muffled music. A bored patrol slow, a freight train scheduled on a line long since dead. The survivor speaks of headlamps that dimmed like eyelids, brakes that softened, and a stretch of track that should not have been there at all. Silver cutting through gravel like a scar, glistening in the dark. Figures appeared not on the rails but beside them, turned just enough to suggest being watched without offering a face. When the engine failed, motion didn't. The tunnel advanced, the windshield retreated, and the air grew heavy, as though the vehicle had become a lung learning to drown. Then came a thud from nowhere and the sensation of being nudged aside by something that had no mass but did possess intention. After, there were scratches in the paint, parallel as handwriting. History, when handled wrong, breeds. The line was laid after protests. The hill was drilled against advice. The water table shifted when an upstream quarry stripped roots from the slopes. An engineer wrote letters that grew sharper until they stopped. A union warned about overtime and exhaustion. A funeral home noticed patterns before the safety board did. Meanwhile, a story older than the tracks smoldered under the town. An abandoned culvert rerouted under sacred ground. A river pinched until it hissed through stone like a concealed fuse. Folklore says anything denied a path carves its own, and the tunnel built to tame a mountain found itself haunted by all the shortcuts taken to force it through. In a ledger of causes, every line points in 2 directions, toward the physics of collapse and the metaphysics of consequence. We stake our reputation on pursuit, then mark where the light fails and the microphones begin to whine. Night falls with the decisiveness of a final stamp. The approach road narrows, cattails whisper against guardrails, and the hillside exhales the day's heat in a sour draught. We stage gear at the threshold as though laying out offerings. Batteries, coils of cable, chalk for marking turns. The plan is simple enough to fail. Walk in until the instruments misbehave. Leave filament markers like breadcrumbs, and count breaths between echoes. Yet the first steps already fold distance strangely. The ceiling seems lower, the rails slightly misaligned. a thin trickle of water sowing through ties with impatient sound. The air tastes old, sweet, and metallic, like a coin held too long on the tongue. When we test our lights, one refuses to start. Another flickers as though sensing to a heartbeat, not our own. Somewhere deeper, metal taps against stone in a rhythm we recognize from the files. 6 pulses, a pause. 6 more. We check our watches. They don't agree. The first stretch accepts us like a corridor that has learned courtesy. Chalk ticks bloom on the sleepers, filaments burn with a patient orange, and the lantern's pulse keeps time the way a bedside clock does, in a room where sleep won't come. The reporter calls distances, the cameraman repeats them, the guide answers with corrections born of feet that remember slope better than numbers do. Yet the count won't hold. Steps inflate and deflate. The same rivet scar greets us twice, once on the left, once on the right, as if the tunnel were folding its sides like a book around a secret. Water threads along, sometimes above our heads, sometimes under our boots, a fickle artery in a body whose anatomy rearranges between blinks. The microphones develop a breath, the kind that fogs glass from the inside. When the lantern flare gutters, the darkness doesn't settle. It sharpens, exposing angles within the black. We press onward, marking each uncertainty as if that made it smaller. The map we sketch becomes an argument. Lines that should arc begin to braid, and the distance from the mouth grows and shrinks like a tide tugged by a moon we cannot see. A draft slides past our cheeks in a way that suggests multiple throats, as though the tunnel practices speaking with more than one mouth. We try a test. A thread tied at hip level to a piton hammered into stone we swear we've never seen. Moments later, the line returns to us from ahead, neatly looped, smelling faintly of damp paper and burnt insulation. The guide mutters about old spur corridors, bricked over after a collapse. But the mortar we tap sounds fresh, almost soft, like bread still warm. We place a camera to watch the wall while we walk a measured 100 paces. When we return, the lens stares at an opening it could not have filmed before, a gap just wide enough for a promise. Our voices lower without being asked. Sound returns before sight. 6 taps, a considered pause. 6 again, like a code etched by impatience. The cameraman aligns levels. The recorder hiccups, rewinds itself half a second, then insists on playing back what we have not yet said. We try to debunk with the usual litany: thermal contraction, falling droplets, a distant vehicle. But the rhythm nests inside each theory and hatches something uglier. When we call out, the echo lags as if it must think before answering. It comes back altered, syllables weighted differently, consonants softened by water. The guide raises the lantern and the flame gutters toward the sound, leaning like a compass needle forced by a magnet. The taps become a drag across stone, as if a rail key were being pulled by an unseen hand. We mark the beat on the sleepers with chalk, counting time into a figure that looks, against all sense, like rails overlaid upon rails. A ghost alignment crossing our own. Behind the gap yawns a chamber that was never in the surveys. The floor dips into a bowl of slick ballast, and a thin runnel threads through like a signature no one can forge. On the far side, a wooden brace has been nailed with a ritualist's exactness, its grain seared by some old heat. A cache of offerings waits there, tarnished coins, a trainman's cap brittle with salt, a child's metal whistle welded shut by rust. The air is salt-sweet and metallic, cut with the earthy fatigue of river mud. We whisper without agreeing to, held in the grammar of places that punish noise. The cameraman reaches to test the brace's strength and jerks back. The wood is warm, as if a hand had just released it. The guide points at a hairline seam rising up the wall and curving away. A culvert spine trying to free itself from masonry. We realize the chamber sits exactly where old maps drew water they later erased. The pressure arrives first, a hush that flattens breath and makes the eardrums decide between pain and surrender. Then the air bulks and rushes, the way atmosphere moves before a locomotive that cannot fit the time we're in. Gravel chatters. Filaments bend and spit. The lantern's flame claws sideways, tall and terrified, and suddenly the rails underfoot feel briefly alive, humming with a frequency that remembers schedules. We press against stone as the invisible mass passes, tremor shouldering tremor, a procession of force without body. The microphones howl and then fall dead as if ashamed. When it clears, the quiet is worse, full of the tiny clicks of cooling metal and a drip that has started keeping time with a heartbeat none of us own. Far down the line, a glow swells and recedes like a lung behind curtains. The guide swallows and points at our chalk. The marks have slid, stretching into arrows that now point deeper in. The glow that swelled and faded ahead finds a rhythm that turns the tunnel into a throat learning to sing again. It isn't light so much as a rehearsal of it, a suggestion that illumination once lived here and still walks the route in absence. We test the distance with a call and receive a reply that arrives late and wrong. Vowels damped as if soaked in silt. The guide traces the culvert seam while the reporter maps the sleepers by touch, counting ties like beads until the arithmetic unthreads. The cameraman plays back footage to anchor us in certainty, and instead captures a shutter sound we never made. A ghost camera documenting our doubt. Far behind, a filament pops and gutters. The darkness flows in to occupy the vacancy with a bureaucrat's briskness. When the pressure returns, subtler this time, it lifts the fine hairs on our arms and drifts past smelling of hot oil and riverbed. The chalk arrows creep again, realigning toward the glow. As though the rock were editing our intentions, we reach a section where the ballast turns to a finer grit that drifts when we exhale, like ash reconsidering gravity. Embedded in the wall are plaques of mineral and iron, shapes that at first look geological but soon arrange themselves into intention. Stamped numbers out of sequence, initials that never repeat. Small rings of solder fused in, circles like halted choruses. The reporter reads the order aloud and hears a rhythm hiding in it. The 6, the pause, the 6, until the cadence starts helping the mouth say it. The cameraman frames a close-up and the lens fogs from within, smear blooming like a fingertip dragged across condensation. The guide produces a folding knife to pry at a plaque, and the wall answers with a tremble that doesn't travel, a localized shiver, as if the stone had a heartbeat stationed there. From somewhere close comes a child's single note, hollow and bright, the exact pitch of the sealed whistle neither of us opened. When the plaque yields, it brings a sliver of darkness with it, a pocket so black the lantern refuses to enter. Inside waits dry air that smells of paper starved of touch. We widen the fissure by degrees, mindful of a hush that feels earned rather than demanded. On the other side, our beams sketch shelving made of repurposed ties, a cache of ledgers bound in tar-streaked cloth, and a clock without hands nailed to a beam. The pages are brittle as moth wings, yet legible. Lists cross-indexing dates we recognize with moments we do not. Annotations in a stern, meticulous hand that begins neat and ends frantic. The entries record not accidents but rehearsals of them, tests, drills, staged blockages, and then a line where ink burrowed hard enough to scar the fiber. Stop for water. The guide lowers the book as if it weighs a life and says nothing. From the main bore, a draft sighs, and the handless clock tilts toward it like a head listening. The entries spiral toward a date whose ink looks newer than it could be, describing a decision to breach the culvert to relieve pressure after a season of landslides. There is an argument preserved in the margins, one voice invoking schedules and quotas, the other the slow law of water. The final lines break off in a stroke that trails into an arc, as though the pen were seized mid-sentence by something that redistributed its future. We step back into the main bore to find the glow no longer distant but distributed, a diffuse pallidness like dawn that forgot where it belongs. The cameraman lifts the recorder, and it plays us a voice in our own cadence, delivering words. We have not yet reached. Do not run. The guide nods once, a private agreement with instruction given from ahead. Then the tunnel inhales. The chalk arrows wrinkle into accidental flowers. The filament markers lean like wheat before weather. And all along the walls the plaques shiver, as if tuning. It arrives without body, but not without weight. A surge that folds the air and slicks the stone with the sheen of sudden weather. The sound is not a horn nor wheels, but the memory of them. A chorus voiced through rust and vapor. The reporter braces and counts, steady and low. A litany meant to hold formation. The cameraman plants one foot in the sleeper's groove and grips the rail as if it were a promise. The guide turns the lantern down until the flame is a bead, making room for whatever history has chosen to repeat. The glow thickens, coalesces, then threads between us, not aligned with steel, but with the chalk marks that used to be ours, as though honoring an earlier survey. A cold, handless push slides past rib and spine, a warning or a courtesy. And when it clears, we realize the seam has opened more of itself. Somewhere toward the new dark, 6 taps answer, the pause between them brimming with invitation. The seam admits us with the reluctance of a scar reopening. Stone trades for brick, then brick for rough-cast panels stamped with numbers that don't climb so much as circle. Air thins and sweetens, perfumed by old paper, and the mineral tang of sea page that never learned to dry. Our steps lose their clack and adopt a hush, souls tasting a skin of silt, laid by floods that visited without leaving footprints. The corridor narrows until shoulders learn new angles. Beyond, a chamber stutters into shape, half culvert, half archive, roof ribs bowed like a spine, trying not to remember weight. Across the floor, chalk lines, ours, yet not ours, slant away in duplicates, converging on a pedestal of stacked ties that cradle a broken signal box. Its faceplate hangs ajar, exposing a nest of copper veined with white salts, and on its inner lid someone has etched a schedule that contains no dates, only weather, fog, 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 rain, stillness, fog. The tunnel exhales as if pleased. We can read. We lift the lid and the recorder clicks alive on its own, spooling a voice that uses our intonations to say things we don't choose. It reads the weather schedule like scripture, and as each word lands, the chamber reacts. Fog dims the headlamps. Rain collects where no leak appears. Stillness tightens in the ears until pulse becomes percussion. Beneath the signal box, a tray of tags clinks, oval brass punched with roots canceled decades ago, each stamped with a tiny notch that bites skin when handled wrong. The guide turns one over to reveal a pinprick bloodstain in a shape too deliberate to be accident. We test the switchgear with a cautious thumb, and a relay trembles awake, throwing a pulse down conduits that vanish into the culvert's throat. Far below, something answers in the language of water meeting obstruction. When the voice in the recorder reaches the final word, fog, it does not stop. It begins again, looped like a confession practiced into fluency. A hatch surrenders to a pry bar, revealing a ladder bolted into a shaft that smells of drowned timbers and iron fever. We descend with the method of people counting debts. The culvert proper unfurls below, an arched artery of black glass where current moves with the secrecy of a thought. On the lip, a maintenance catwalk runs thin as an apology, its grating slicked by algae that has learned patience. We listen, and the taps we chased resolve into a metronome made of drips, striking bolt heads, disciplined by a draft that edits their spacing. But beneath that order hums a will. The water thickens when we lean over it, thins when we step back, and makes room not for us, but for the weight that travels this way on schedules unwritten. We set a camera to face upstream and catch, in the corner of its screen, a reflection that completes us. 3 figures plus a fourth, that only exists where water stores light it refuses to return. The current's voice changes when we speak to it in the grammar of maps. We lay out the ledger's findings in careful phrases, dates that became drills, drills that became disasters, culverts breached like veins tapped for pressure relief, and the culvert replies by lifting detritus from its bed. A ticket stub, lacquered into legibility. A fragment of porcelain number plate, a whistle tongue freed from its rusted case. The signal box upstairs thumps once, and a far gate moans, letting a freshet in that taste of pine and something colder, like stone that has never seen sun. The catwalk quivers, not with collapse, but with a passing. The unseen mass again, lighter here, curious. We place a brass tag on the grate to mark the moment, and it skates a half-meter against the slope, stopping exactly where an old chalk mark ghosts a steel. The water shows us its ledger. When blocked, it taught itself new paths. When lied to, it learned to lie back. Up tunnel, somewhere between chambers, a hornless pressure announces a choice. The recorder, still looping, stutters. The voice tries to insert a new word that will not fit clear, then dissolves into a wash of room tone that tastes of cold metal. The signal box flips itself, relays chattering like teeth, and the culvert's draft reverses hard enough to press our clothes to skin. A low glow swells downstream, not headlamp nor lantern, but a bloom the water shapes for itself, pale as constraint. The guide says one sentence without ornament. If we open it, something closes behind. We follow the chalk that is no longer ours along the catwalk to a valve wheel welded by rust and intention. On its rim, a line scratched by a careful hand, stopped for water. When we brace and turn, the wheel gives with a scream that is not mechanical. The glow elongates, halves, and then threads past us into the main, bore like a train, made of kept promises and unmade roots. The glow pours into the main bore and drags the pressure with it. A tide drawn by a moon that moves inside stone. The corridor ahead bronzes and blanches in pulses, revealing rails that don't match ours. Sleepers, misaligned as if 2 histories ran parallel and forgot to stay apart. The reporter calls the count, not to measure distance but to keep breath honest. The numbers come out as weather, an inheritance from the looped schedule that will not quit. The cameraman angles for proof and captures only the suggestion of velocity, a blur like heat, rising off iron in winter. The guide steadies a hand on the wall and says the thing no one wants. That some tragedies were rehearsals because someone needed the tunnel to learn. The air tastes of brine and lampblack. The chalk at our feet creeps another centimeter toward a crosscut that used to be sealed. Ahead, the glow gathers into a form that is not a train but carries its grammar. Approach, arrival, consequence. We decide to meet it where paths cross. At the crosscut, mortar that once held its argument gives way to touch, crumbling with the soft shame of a lie exposed. Beyond is a platform without edges, a room the size of a memory, its roof stitched with cables that hum in keys our bodies recognize before our minds do. On the floor lie markers arranged like an anatomy lesson for the tunnel. Lengths of rail where arteries should be, signal flags laid out as lungs. A clock face for a skull. The glow circulates through this diagram as if completing a circuit, and the room breathes. 3 beats of pressure, 1 of relief. The reporter kneels and finds a ledger page sealed under glass, inked with the phrase we now wear on our tongues. Stopped for water. But below, in paler script, another sentence waits. Started for witness. The cameraman's device begins recording without a hand, time code skipping like a heart under cold. Somewhere deep, the taps resume, not a warning, but a procession. The procession arrives as absence shaped into etiquette. It passes along the diagram's rails, and the room obliges, echoing with the phantom click of wheels crossing joints that are only chalk. Breath cools. Skin prickles as though an unseen carriage window slid open and night leaned in to count us. The guide whispers a story about a day the culvert surged and the signal locked green against order, sending two schedules into a single throat. The line did not forgive. Bodies were called passengers even when they were workers. Reports called it weather even when it was will. The reporter lifts the glass and the ink beneath spiders, not running but reorganizing. Letters answering to a draft that has learned handwriting. The sentence resolves. Started for witness, stopped for denial, started again. The cameraman plants a tripod on the chalk skull, and the glow explodes into filaments, then settles as if accepting an offering. A choice stalks the room, patient as floodwater. We test the room the way you test an argument. The reporter speaks the schedule backward, and the glow dims, then returns stronger, as if corrected. The cameraman plays the survivor's testimony into the air, and the echoes send it back stripped of fear, leaving only verbs. Entered, stalled, pushed, spared. The guide sets a brass tag on the diagram's heart, and it pivots to indicate the culvert below. The taps synchronize with pulse, and through the floor comes the weightless pressure of a crossing. Not impact, not collision, but a decision finding its track. We understand that the tunnel does not crave death. It craves acknowledgement of what was traded to rush iron through water and bone. The reporter lays the ledger page where a spine should be, and the glow threads through, brightening until the diagram appears to inhale. The crosscut wall trembles, seems relaxing. Somewhere behind us, the filament markers collapse like wheat after harvest. We are being asked to say it aloud, so we testify. The reporter names the shortcuts. The culvert breach to appease the hill, the schedules forced, the drills that rehearse disaster until the script learned breath. The cameraman adds what lenses know. How light folds where it shouldn't, how rooms remember angles, longer than people remember pain. The guide completes it with the old law of water. Deny it path, and it writes its own, and every writing costs. The tunnel listens. The taps resolve into quiet, the pressure unknots, and the glow steps free of the diagram, forming a corridor of pale between us and the main bore. Along its length stand objects raised from the culvert like witnesses. A cap, a whistle's tongue, a ticket stub that has remembered a name. The schedule in the signal box stutters and, for the first time, adds a word we have not heard. Clear. The air shifts, tasting briefly of sun on railhead. Behind, the darkness does not chase. It waits, satisfied, while we choose which path to carry back. The corridor of pale recedes behind like a promise that expects to be kept, and the main bore greets us with a hush that feels earned. What changed is not the darkness, but its posture. It no longer leans in. It listens from a respectful distance. The recorder, once a stubborn oracle, now waits for instruction. We give it none. Instead, we pick our way along sleepers glossed with a new stillness, noting how the drip rate has softened from metronome to lullaby. Then the schedule asserts itself with a final exam. A pressure blooms at our backs, not hostile but impatient, herding us past the place where our arrows once curled. Far ahead, the night dilates around an exit we cannot yet see, and the tunnel's breath lines up with our own. 3 beats and a release. Between heart and rail runs a recognition that this place holds us to our version of the truth. Should we soften it, the culvert will harden again. We choose to keep saying it, aloud and unadorned, until the air tastes clear. The shrine at the threshold has shifted without hands. Flowers straighten as if watered by absence. The toy train faces outward, its chipped paint glinting with a clarity that feels like permission. We set the ledger among the candles and the wick light steadies, no longer flinching from drafts. Outside, wind scrapes the hillside with brittle grass, and the sky has the color of a bruise considering forgiveness. We record a statement meant for the ones who will never descend. The root is not cursed by appetite, but by accounting. A balance kept by water and weight, and the narratives built to dodge them. While we speak, a patrol beacon crests the road, and radio chatter arrives already relieved, as if it knew the ending before we earned it. Yet, the tunnel requests one last act of witness. The 6 taps return, slower, like a benediction shared in a language learned too late. We answer by leaving the entrance open and the schedule posted where eyes can argue with it. Morning folds itself along the ridge, and the town appears as if exhaled. Roofs, rinsed by mist, a siren yawning itself off, the slow arithmetic of shopkeepers raising shutters. We carry our artifacts to a table that once hosted rumor and now suffers proof. The whistle's freed tongue, the tag scarred by a careful notch, the ticket stub revived by water's machine memory. The recorder spins and captures static that resolves into wheel rhythm, then into something gentler. The rustle of pages turning in a room below. We draft a report that refuses to flatter anyone, least of all the living, and the act of writing lifts a weight not from us, but from the sentences themselves, which stop fighting their shape. Outside the window, a service vehicle passes without entering the approach road, as if obeying an etiquette newly remembered. The guide draws a final line on the map, not to end anything but to return a river to its name. The paper drinks the ink without complaint. Ow! Word travels in the slow way that changes hold. Not headlines, not sirens, but a chain of nods, crossing counters and porches. The memorial by the mouth gathers people who speak to one another instead of into weather. A worker points out where a barrier will rise if the board approves the budget it once denied. A parent sets petals without asking the dark to keep score. We stand apart and let the town write its own caption. The schedule is posted on an easel, lines that used to be prophecy now demoted to forecast, and even forecasts can be argued. The taps do not return. In their place comes the normal racket of morning. Truck brakes, sparrows, the scrape of a sign rehung. And yet, the tunnel remains what it is. A throat through stone, a lesson taught in the grammar of force. It will not absolve anyone and does not require devotion. It requires maintenance. The simplest words we wrote, stopped for water, become instructions rather than epitaph. By afternoon, the ridge dries and the tunnel exhales a last cool breath that smells only of stone and iron. Nothing borrowed. We return once more, not to tempt it, but to confirm a simple fact, that the arrows we left now point outward. The recorder sits in the threshold and captures silence with the dignity of a solved equation. We chalk a single mark waist-high where sight fades and leave space around it as you would around a name. The lantern stays unlit. There is no glow, no press of phantom mass, only a draft moving in alignment with the world above. We step back, and the toy train on the shrine does not turn. On the road, a truck consolidates equipment, and the driver checks mirrors with the casual caution of someone who intends to go home. The light finds the rails and makes a ribbon of them to the bend. The dark holds its ground without protest. The hill keeps breathing, but the breath is ordinary. The peace airs before noon, and the town listens the way a body listens for a returning ache. The words move out like a tide that leaves drawers open and curtains breathing. Phones vibrate, blinds tilt, and a meeting convenes where minutes are taken with care that used to be reserved for condolences. In the quiet after, the route above the hill sounds different. Vehicles downshift earlier. Footsteps hesitate at the guardrail, and even birds correct their flight before crossing the mount. On the shrine, wax pools without drowning wicks, a small miracle that belongs only to days like this. Then the weather shifts. A bruise of cloud climbs the ridge with the determination of a schedule that won't stay canceled. Forecasts can be argued, but gravity can't. The recorder, left near the easel, coughs awake and offers a fragment of our own statement bent by distance, stopped for water. The pause that follows is long enough to become prayer. Somewhere underfoot, a gate we opened considers whether to stay kind. Rain begins as if someone upstairs tried the word out loud and liked the sound. The first drops find the rails and stitch a seam of silver along the bend. The culvert accepts what it is owed and replies in calm, disciplined syllables. We walk the slope with boots that remember night work, checking stakes and tape and the places where past decisions hid. The tunnel mouth has lost its sneer. It waits like a gate that has learned consent. Then the taps return, not with hunger but with etiquette. 6 and a pause, 6 and a pause, the metronome of a heart that has decided to keep time. We stop beside the chalk line that faces outward now and listen long enough to be certain the rhythm isn't ours. The recorder takes it down and adds nothing. No translation, no prophecy, just proof that water is moving where it should. Somewhere in the hill, the ledger pages dry a little more, the ink lifting from complaint into instruction. Rain strengthens. The road holds. Evening draws a lid over the ridge, and the town settles into the sort of quiet that amplifies choices. We return to the records room to pack the artifacts for custody. Bag, label, photograph, each gesture refusing myth without denying wonder. On the table, the ticket stub that remembered a name now remembers a date as well. Ink risen from pulp by patience and damp. The whistle's tongue sits like a healed bone. When the room's fluorescent buzz stutters, the recorder fills the gap with a gentler sound. The shush of pages turned in the pocket below the seam. It's an old rhythm, made humble by repetition. We log the sound and almost miss the small correction that follows. 3 beats, a release, then a second release, as if the place itself added margin for error, a grace period widened by witness. The storm leans on the windows. Across the street, a window sign's chain taps glass with the inventiveness of rain. Somewhere a gate stays open because a sentence was finished. Night complicates the rain and the road dims to a ribbon of obedience. We make one last pass to the mouth, less out of superstition than duty. The shrine has grown by 3 items that could only have come from attics. A timetable with a corner burned, a conductor's punch that still bites card, and a silvered photograph in which faces have fogged into the shapes of intention. We do not tidy them. This place has earned its own curation. A patrol idles with lights down, engine a polite heartbeat. The taps are gone, replaced by the thread of culvert music a listener could mistake for calm if they hadn't learned the grammar. We set a plastic sheet over the posted schedule and watch the water find its edges without taking them. When we turn to go, the recorder in a pocket we forgot to close wakes and captures one last sentence spoken in none of our voices. Started for witness. It does not ask for reply. It adds the word clear without waiting. Toward midnight, the storm breaks its own cadence and runs out of nerve. Air thins. The hill exhales, and the tunnel becomes only a tunnel again. Stone, iron, purpose. We stand at the threshold and count to 6 for no reason except habit. Then let the silence answer. The tally of losses will not shrink. It never does. But the ledger has been amended by light and labor, and that is a thing with weight. We shoulder our packs and step back, careful not to mistake survival for absolution. As we pass the driplin, the toy train on the shrine does not turn, yet the rails beyond reflect a pale arc as if a carriage just cleared the bend under an invisible sky. The recorder, for once, stays off. In the pool by the wall, the 4th reflection lingers, neither following nor demanding, a resident now, not a thief. The mouth takes a breath and holds it. We answer by doing the simplest brave thing left. We leave, and we leave the way open.